Real Talk USA.
It's my house, come on, turn it up.
The hour where the U.S. mission to the African Union comes to you through Afro FM 105.3 to highlight the United States partnership in Africa. Current issues will be discussed. Guests will engage on a variety of topics ranging from politics to jazz. Co-hosted by AUL Solomon of Afro FM and Chris Meade of USAU. The show will air every Thursday from 5 to 6 p.m. Feel free to participate by sending messages to the USAU social media sites www.usau.usmission.gov or www.facebook.com/USAU and follow USAU on twitter.com/USAU.
Just relax. Welcome to my house.
Real Talk USA.
Welcome to my house. It's my house.
Hello everyone, this is our weekly show, Real Talk USA on 105.3 Afro FM, and it's me, UL Solomon, with
Chris Meade. How are you, UL?
Hi Chris,
And Ms. Gabwa. Good afternoon, everybody.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I think this is the first time all three of us have been in the same room together in a few weeks.
Yes.
And where have we all been?
Everywhere.
Well, today we have a very special guest with us today, UL.
Yes.
Yes.
So it's so interesting. Let's introduce him.
So today, ladies and gentlemen, we have Braian Morales. Did I say that right? Morales?
You said it quite well.
Morales. He's a division director of Global Drug Demand Reduction Programs with the U.S. State Department, the Bureau. It's called INL. All of that is a mouthful, and Braian, we're going to ask you to explain all that in a bit. So,
Happy to do it.
Welcome to Addis.
Thank you so much.
Have you been to Addis before?
It's actually my first time. It's a lovely city and so busy, so much activity. I can't wait to come back again.
What is INL?
Sure. Well, INL is the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs. Sometimes people abbreviate it by calling it drugs and thugs in terms of what it does, but it actually works along the whole continuum of the criminal justice system. So from police to the judiciary system, to the correction system, it actually helps strengthen governments in supporting that whole continuum. And of course it has its counter-narcotics mission, its drugs mission, which is the main area where we work and where my program is active, which is specifically in the area of drug demand reduction. That's reducing substance use, preventing it, and treating it around the world.
Well, thank you for that introduction to INL and for the drug reduction program. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I think my story is very similar to that of many Americans. I am a first-generation American. My father was born in Cuba. All of his ancestors were in Cuba. And he left Cuba in 1970, moved to Spain, met my mother. And they moved to Los Angeles, which is where I was born. I grew up in a very Spanish-speaking community, surrounded by people from many Hispanic countries, from Mexico, from Guatemala, from Cuba. And it was very interesting because I went to school and I didn't speak a word of English. I didn't need to survive up until the time of elementary school. And it was very interesting that teachers were just so alarmed. How does this child not know English? What country did he come from? And so I actually spent the first couple of years of my education learning English, which I think I speak pretty well now. But that was sort of my upbringing. And when I moved to Miami, also, very Spanish. The majority speak Spanish in Miami. Very large Cuban population. So it was actually it actually speaks to the diversity of the United States and really how we really are a melting pot of cultures. We are all from a different place. I think the only difference is at what time in history did we arrive at the United States. And now living in the Washington, D.C. area, it's certainly true. I see people from all over the world, all over Africa. It's such an enriching experience to be able to interact in a cultural setting that I think is very much like Addis, where you have people from missions all over the world that are here in this big international city. And so in that way, I think that our countries and our cultures here are very similar.
So you said that your father left Cuba in 1970. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. I mean, he left because of the Castro regime and the hardships that communism had imposed. He had seen how communism had taken a lot from the communities there. He was an accountant, pretty much middle class, but there was a lot of restrictions on the government. And there was a big campaign for a 10-ton sugar harvest, where the Castro regime had said, we want everyone to leave their jobs and go out into the fields and start cultivating sugar. And
even the accountants.
Even the accountants. So they send them off to go cut sugar cane. And you can't cut sugar. You can't send anybody to cut sugar cane. You cut the cane too low and you kill the plant. You cut it too high, you're not getting the sugar. So in a sense, the 10-ton sugar campaign failed because they decimated a lot of the. But they had them working in those labor camps year after year after year after year, and then finally they released him and said, "Okay, you can kind of go off. This has been sort of, we don't need you anymore. The revolution doesn't need you." And he was the last in his family to leave. So at that stage, they basically kind of took everything: the house, the car, the money, everything. And so he fled over to Spain. The Catholic Relief Charities sort of helped him migrate to Spain, and that's where he worked for many years in like 1,000 jobs until he was able to sort of find a stable job, meet my mother, and there they went from a regime of the left in Cuba to a regime of the right. It was Franco's.
It was still Franco, right?
Franco's regime. So it was still a dictatorship, but from the other end, and a lot of hardships on that side as well. So they said, well, let's look for a country that's more free, that will help have a prosperous future for our children. And so that's where thankfully they moved to the United States and actually connected with my other family there.
That was going to be my next question. So why they end up in L.A. instead of Florida, which is the typical,
It's
if you think of a stereotypical destination for Cuban Americans.
That's right, and actually it was L.A. because that's where my aunt lived, and so it was just a lot more convenient. Had family there. But LA was very difficult as well. Neither of my parents spoke English. It was very difficult to get jobs. It was factory to factory and trying to find lots of different jobs. I remember on the weekends we would go to the local markets. We call them flea markets in the U.S. to sell all the goods that we'd buy in the downtown area, and it would be my Saturdays and Sundays, trying to sell every little toy and cosmetic product that we had. And so it was always sort of kind of living day by day to make sure that we could sort of make ends meet, which is the story of every immigrant. I think when you come in, you're trying to sort of find your place.
He wasn't an accountant when he came to the States, huh?
No, well, it was very difficult without English to sort of continue your practice and sort of get in and recertified and everything else. My father-in-law, on the other hand, being from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, former British colony, had a much easier time as a nurse, sort of being able to assimilate and get his degrees or sort of his validations, his certificates, to be able to get back into the system. So I think English-speaking immigrants have a much easier time than non-English immigrants in sort of assimilating within the U.S. and sort of finding their way. But I think in the end, the sacrifice that the immigrants make to the U.S. is really for their children. And I think as a first-generation American, we all really feel a big responsibility to really make our parents proud and to sort of help realize that American dream for the parents that came before us.
So why did your family leave L.A. and then go to Miami?
Well, because in fact the cost of living in Los Angeles was very high. Still is. Properties, everything's very high. And actually Miami was actually growing. There was sort of a big boom. Unfortunately, it was due to a lot of drug trafficking as well, and there's a lot of money for many reasons in Miami. But also my uncle lived there. So my father had a sister and brother in each city. And so he connected to my uncle and actually became his accountant, and actually they worked together in a business and were able to sort of expand that work, and it was a very comfortable living, and so that was one area of work. And then for my mother, actually, I think about the age of what was I, 11, 12. My mother was very interested in doing social work, and we actually founded a group home in Miami for adults with developmental disabilities. And at that point, my father also left and stopped working with the accountant to become full-time and sort of work in this group home. And so they still have the group home today. It's been now 30 years with a group home. And so we have 6 adults with developmental disabilities. And it really sort of instilled in me sort of that value of sort of that service that we need to provide to others. Again, my parents still not speaking that much English. As a child, I remember writing policies for them, helping them. Hey, somebody's calling from the state health agency or the police department, the fire department. They want to do an inspection, and I'd have to be writing policies for them and helping them with different things. But that's what the children of immigrants do. You help out your parents as you need to. So. And it's really it's been very nice in sort of this work. The adult men, they call me brother. They call my parents, mom and pop, and it's very much like a family environment. And so it's been a very rewarding experience. And it's also led me to be very interested in the substance use issue as well, which is one also of service and social work.
Okay. First, as a side, I've never been to Miami.
What?
It's one big city in the United States that I think I haven't been to that
You have
I really
got
want
to
go.
visit.
I know. I've been to Florida. I just haven't been there. So I hear it's incredible. You went to college then, and how did you get into the State Department? So what's your trajectory? How did that happen?
Sure. I went to Georgetown University, both for undergraduate and graduate school, and I worked for the Pan American Health Organization afterwards. And interested in the health field, interested in the international relations aspect. And I just applied through USA Jobs to the U.S. Department of State, as they tell us all to do, and as you graduate from college. And I was very fortunate to join the U.S. mission to the Organization of American States from my Latin American background. It was very interesting to work at a U.S. mission. Actually, it's the only U.S. mission based in Washington, D.C. for a multilateral organization. So that was very interesting because this international organization is headquartered in the capital of the U.S. So it made things very easy. And at the same time, we couldn't consult with capital because we are capital. So we had no excuse. We had to really be on the ball in terms of all of our work. But that was a very enriching experience. Mm-hmm. And that's basically how I made it in. And then that was in 2004 when I joined the State Department, and then over the years sort of jumping around a few different positions.
Where else have you served?
After that U.S. mission, I joined INL, this Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement. I first worked in the Afghanistan counter-narcotics program. So it was a brand new office, and I knew nothing about Afghanistan, but
we still don't. Collectively as a government, we still don't.
How hard was it?
It was, well, when you study international relations, you love international affairs. And so you can substitute one country for another. You can learn the new names. You can learn the new places. It's your passion for learning that actually helps you get up to speed. So it took me some time. I took Dari classes. I learned the language, which now I have forgotten most of the vocabulary.
I also served in Afghanistan, had Dari at one point, and I was talking to my wife the other day about how little I remember of Dari.
There's Salam and there's Tashakur.
And there's Bali when you answer the phone.
Bali.
Tashakur, that's right. Yeah.
But that was a very instructive experience. I worked on multilateral coordination, and so as a junior officer, I'd be going to these big meetings of the G8 and Paris Pact, and I'd be there, making presentations in terms of our U.S. position, and I'd hear the position from Germany and from Sweden and from France. And sometimes we would agree, other times we wouldn't agree, and then we said, well, the decision will be made, 3, 4, 5 notches above us, but it was nice to have this exchange and report back to our superiors. And that felt, very exciting, but over time I felt like, I really want to do programmatic work. I really want to sort of get into seeing the transformation in front of my eyes. And I had heard of this this mysterious person named Tom Brown, who had worked for 30 years in the State Department and had done all of this work in all over the world, and had would go into drug dens and opium dens and crack houses and would work with these marginalized children. I said, I think I'm interested to see what kind of work he's doing. And he worked in the drug demand reduction program. And so in 2008, I did a rotation in his office, and I completely fell in love with the work that he did. And I said, well, this is exactly what I want to do for the rest of my career. And so a few months later, I joined his office, and I was there up until 2015 when he retired, and then I took over for him. And it's the office that I'm in now literally saves lives. And it's very difficult to explain in conversation. It's sort of what I always tell people: you have to come with us to the field and actually see. You see prevention programs that we're doing in schools. You see people that are in treatment, but we actually become friends with so many people around the world that are going through our programs, and we visit them and we stay in touch and we connect, whether it be through Facebook, through WhatsApp, through social media. And we see them months, years after, and you see sort of the joy in the faces of family members. You know, my husband doesn't beat me, helps the daughter with school, our lives are transformed, thank you. And what did we do? We had a marginal investment that trained a counselor that helped provide for services for these individuals to go through a 30-day treatment program. And that was enough to sort of help transform not just the lives of that individual, but the whole family context and the way that community was interacting. So that's a very rewarding experience, and that's what's been really sort of drawing more and more people to want to keep joining our team, which has grown from 3 people. We've got 8 people now on our team. That just keeps growing and growing.
So, yeah, you touched on it a little bit. And you said you fell in love with the work that what was his name?
Tom Brown.
Tom Brown. So you mentioned that you fell in love with the work that he was doing. Can you describe what is a drug demand reduction program? Like what are some of the facets? What are some of the components? Like you mentioned counselors, and you mentioned what else is involved?
So first, I think we need to talk about what's the concept of addiction, right? People have been using drugs for all of human history. Since the ancient Egyptians, we've got records, Mesopotamia, that people have been using drugs. It's only within the past 100 years, and even less, I'd say within the past 50 years, that we actually understand what addiction is scientifically. It's a chronic relapsing brain disease. It's a very treatable disease. So it's chronic and relapsing like diabetes and heart disease. But the success rates for treatment are on par with heart disease and diabetes. Sometimes we say, oh, there's no hope for this addict and this person and that person and they're drug users. And there's very stigmatizing terms. We don't even use the word addict. We say people with substance use disorders. No, it's a very treatable condition. It's very... So what we do with our drug demand reduction programs, recognizing all of this science that we've now got 50 core years of scientific literature that say prevention and treatment work, is to create programs that help prevent substance use. That's the initiation. That's even experimentation, or if you start experimenting before you become a binge user and clinically addicted, how do you prevent that whole progression of the disease? We have prevention programs, and then we have treatment programs to help treat people that have substance use disorders. Once the chemicals in the brain have sort of compelled you and made you seek that drug behavior, where you get so much pleasure from the drug that there's nothing else that gives you that dopamine rush. And so friends and family and watching movies and eating and things that would actually give you pleasure, none of that gives you pleasure because you can't get enough pleasure-seeking chemicals from that. It's all focused on drugs, and that's why a drug user becomes so isolated. When it gets to that point, there's no willpower that will let you stop using drugs. You need medical intervention, and that's where a drug treatment program comes into play. We look at that whole continuum from prevention through treatment. And when you get out of treatment, I said it's a chronic and relapsing disease. You're never cured. There's no cure for addiction. You're in recovery once you leave the treatment program, and you have to stay on recovery for the rest of your life. And it's not very easy, and you may relapse. And it is very much like a diabetic that relapses and has that cookie that they're not supposed to have, or heart disease, and someone's not supposed to have that, and they have this cholesterol-rich. People can relapse at any moment because it's very difficult to sort of maintain that sobriety and adhere to the treatment program. But that's where that whole system has to work. And so we're very focused on helping governments and civil society organizations strengthen those systems on a country-by-country basis.
So thank you for that. We'll share something personal. We'll decide whether we want to keep it in or not. But, yeah, so I had my oldest brother actually had drug addiction, and he OD'd back in 2004.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah. Well, look, the thing, he was 17 years older than me, and from the entire time that I was alive, I never knew him before he had this, this difficulty, right? And, when I saw him, when I go to Tennessee and I'd see him, it was all consuming. He would rifle through my mom and dad's medicine cabinets when he didn't have money, looking for heart medication or anything that could be a substitute, and that's the thing I think that we don't do in the United States, perhaps, and maybe other countries as well, is like dealers are one thing, but the people that are doing drugs, people sort of make an assumption about how they made a choice and how they're making bad decisions. And my mom would discuss my brother in those terms, and so would I, right? But the fact of the matter is, like, the way that some people's brains are wired, and this is just, I'm not a scientist, I haven't looked at things the way that you have, but, his original sin was trying it when he was 16. After that, right, I mean, it's almost like, I don't want to say a person can't be held responsible for the things that they do, but the power that they had on his brain is so, it's almost, I mean, if you're not involved and emotionally wrapped up with it, like, it's almost fascinating to see how all-consuming it can be. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit more about, you feel free to disagree with any of that, but like, I not making excuses for my brother, but I just, he, to the very end, like, he tried, he was in and out, surprisingly, he never got arrested. Got arrested for some other thing, like some stupid thing happened to having a shopping cart in the back of his car, right? Got arrested for that, never got arrested all the years that he was experimenting and coping and self-medicating. Like, he never got arrested, and it always surprised me. Maybe if he had been, maybe something would have been different, I don't know. But, he, to the very end, like, he struggled with it, was trying to turn it around, then at the end it got him, right? And you have to think, yeah, is it really, the way that we treat people that are on addiction, it's extremely difficult. Having had a brother that was on drugs, extremely hard to deal with him when he was in that state, right? I mean, he's not in his right mind, right? But it's easy to push away, but that's the last thing I think we're supposed to do, right?
Families. Yeah.
So,
thank you. Thank you for sharing that. A lot of families around the world struggle with what to do with a family member that has a substance use disorder. There's all of this love they want to give, and the person that they know, that they love, sometimes doesn't seem to be there. It seems to be something else that's overpowering that individual. And so I've heard so many times families wrestle with exactly that issue. I don't trust my child. I feel more comfortable if they're in jail than if they're outside. If I don't see them, I hope, and there's this lack of trust, and it really is very much like you're saying. When the brain is rewired, I mean, the factor of judgment is out the door. The level of risks that an individual is willing to take to acquire that pleasure-seeking chemical. That deprivation of a pleasure-seeking chemical would be like the deprivation of food, like the deprivation of any other type of living function that your body needs, except to a 100th degree, because that dopamine gush that you are getting from that drug is so much greater than you are getting from any other activity in life. So absolutely, when you say, I can't believe that this person did this, and I've seen that in some countries, people will introduce into the drugs things that you wouldn't. In Pakistan, we know that in some places they introduce cockroaches. They crush the cockroaches because the bile produces some psychoactive pleasure-seeking chemical, and people will smoke and consume that cockroach.
How would somebody figure that out? Like if people put that much energy, right, into getting a degree or something, like what could people do in this world, right?
Yeah, I've heard that in West Africa they scrape the tailpipe of the exhaust of the cars, and you know that this can't be good for you, but someone figured out that this gives you that extra boost and this extra high, and so they will go at no lengths to harm their bodies. And
this is not prescriptive, by the way.
This is not prescriptive.
Sucking a tailpipe is dangerous.
Let's put some disclaimers on this.
Do not eat cockroaches.
Yes, but it shows the level of disconnect that someone, you ask that same person when they're 10, 15 years old. Absolutely not. I would never do that.
Yeah.
But when you get to this level, you have stepped out of yourself, and that's where I think, to your point, compassion is very important, and not giving up on people with substance use disorders, and most importantly, not only focusing on family members but others in the community that are out there. This is a problem for society, and when you see people that are on the streets, that may be homeless, that may have other issues. The issue is not just to turn away and say that's not my problem, and that's one of the challenges that we find around the world.
Can we talk a little bit about prevention? So
prevention is very important,
and not an American thing. People all over the world suffer from drug addiction.
I want to tie that to also when you mentioned the original sin of trying. You could call it original sin. What kind of judgment do you have when you're 16 years old? The problem is that the adolescence, the last part of the brain that develops is the prefrontal cortex. That's decision-making functions of the brain. Teenagers make very bad decisions. They're very impulsive. They got all these hormones and chemicals in their body. So you're already dealing with a semi-stable individual that is between childhood and adulthood and is trying to find their way. So they're very prone to take risks at certain moments. And what actually can propel them to do something or not is that context in which they are living. And so we talk about protective factors and risk factors. You want to have as many protective factors as possible and as few risk factors as possible. That will give a child, in whatever their balance is at that moment in life, the ability to avoid exposure to substances and experimentation with drugs. And so what type of protective factors can we talk about? You can talk about, a strong family, a good school system, friends that don't use drugs, no drug trafficking in the community or high presence, no exposure, no idle time, a lot of activities, a lot of ways that you can sort of engage youth to have a very healthy, productive environment. And what are risk factors? Well, you can imagine, drugs in schools, a bad group of friends, pure parental attachment, maybe perhaps some neglect, some abuse. Not to say that a child will have all of these or none of these. They may have. Everyone has a combination of different ones.
So I'm divorced and my kids live in Washington. Are they doomed?
They are not doomed. Absolutely not. I mean, I'll tell you, I never experimented with drugs. There were drugs in my high school. I think what kept me away from them, first, my group of friends sort of didn't go there. But I wouldn't say that's first. Actually, first were my parents, that I think I would have greatly disappointed them. I also felt a little scared to experiment and lose control, the sort of that sensation. I was more afraid of losing control than of feeling any type of euphoria from the substances. So I think it's different for everybody. But when you talk about, I think from a governmental level or a civil society level or kind of our responsibility in the policymaking world, you have to look at how do you strengthen across the whole community preventative factors. And there are many different ways that you do prevention. And there's different sciences of prevention. There's family prevention, school prevention, media prevention, workplace prevention as well for those in the workplace, and environmental prevention, which is policy development.
So when somebody takes drugs, right, and then they start going down this road, what are some of the treatments that you can share with the audience?
Sorry, can I go back to prevention for a minute?
Yeah, sure.
One other piece that I wanted to mention about prevention is very different from treatment. Treatment is medical in a sense. It's a medical intervention. Prevention actually is more related to influencing behavior. It actually comes more from the science of communications, and it's the science that companies use to sell you a product. So it's the same science that says buy this or use this that you use to say don't use this, and so it's about influencing human behavior. Treatment is very different. Treatment is on what actual medical interventions do you use to actually help people through the cycle of treatment into recovery. When you ask about what are specific treatment interventions that you use, well, there are two different forms of treatment. There's pharmacological treatment, which is medical treatment, medicines that one takes. That is primarily for opioid addiction, and there are very specific medications that actually block the craving. There's nothing similar to that for cocaine, for example, or methamphetamine or other substances. Although there is for alcohol as well, and there's certain medications. And then there is also psychosocial interventions. Aside from the medicines, there's the psychosocial, and that's counseling and psychological tools. And there are many different psychological tools that are used. We say that addiction treatment is a biopsychosocial disease. So you have to treat the biology of the individual, the psychology, the psychological context, and also the social context of the individual as well. Because let's say that you bring somebody from, let's say, a very marginalized, poor slum area, and they come and they receive treatment services in a wonderful clinic, and then you send them right back to that area where you have the drug traffickers and their friends that are using drugs. Well, you haven't addressed the social context. So you need recovery groups. You need to actually create a new group of friends for that individual. It's like anything. When you have to change your complete lifestyle and rearrange your life, it's hard to do that. But it's very necessary because everything else is contingent on you sort of having a new path in life and finding a new road to recovery.
So I understand that you're here in Addis, and I understand you had a meeting with the Ministry of Health. Are you also going to the AU? Or have you gone to the AU already?
Yes, indeed. I met yesterday with the Commissioner for Social Affairs, Commissioner El Fadil, and we talked about this program that we have jointly with the African Union. Actually, INL has been supporting the African Union now for 3 years. Every year we provide a $500,000 contribution, and we're actually looking to expand that collaboration in the coming years around this area of drug demand reduction. One of the things that we've started supporting has been a network of policymakers from around the African continent, from governments, who come together on an annual basis to discuss drug demand reduction needs, assess where their countries are, what type of activities they are doing, and what their needs are, and see how best the continent can then come together and share data and best practices to strengthen their response to the addiction work around the continent. But there's one other very important work that the AU is doing for us. And I wanted to highlight one of the central parts of the reason that I'm here, which is that we are very concerned by what is happening with drug use on the African continent. In the late, let's say 2008 period or such, the United States started seeing a decrease in cocaine consumption. Cocaine consumption in the U.S. Precipitously declined by 50% over 5 years. We actually started having a significant amount of opioid use, and now we have an opioid crisis in the United States. Cocaine use hasn't disappeared from the U.S., it just has dropped significantly, and now it's starting to go up again.
When did it kick in? 2008?
2008 was the...
Cocaine, I mean, to what do you attribute that? Is it the economic crisis? Cocaine's a more expensive drug, or is it...
There could be many different, I mean, you talk about the U.S. U.S. is a network of states and communities, each with their own economic situation as well. Some people may attribute it to the boom and bust cycle of uppers and downers. And so you have stimulants like cocaine replaced by downers like heroin, and there's cycles that will go up and down, and we're in for another upper cocaine, methamphetamine, stimulant crisis followed by a depressant crisis. I mean, you have these different theories. price points, accessibility. There's a lot of factors that could come into play. So I hear all the debates. I don't even take sides because the reality is you've got addiction, you've got to address it. In reality, that was surprising, but what continues to be surprising is that the amount of coca produced continues to increase. And last year, Colombia had a huge harvest, higher than before. And that product is not, in its totality, going to go up to the U.S. Traffickers are dumping that in developing countries, in the South American market, in Central America. They're dropping the price points. The concern is that is going to really start proliferating. In addition to the other trend, which is that in the U.S. now, the traditional drug traffickers of plant-based drugs like the opium poppy that makes heroin or the coca leaf that makes cocaine, they're finding a lot of competition from the new psychoactive substances. Anyone with an organic chemistry degree can, out of their basement, produce all of these new drugs and sell them on the internet or the dark web. And this is a huge problem now for Europe and North America and Asian countries. And there's this proliferation of new psychoactive substances. And so the drug traffickers, in addition to saying we have this excess crop, what they're doing is...
I don't feel sorry for them. I mean, I can't say...
You can't feel sorry for them. But listen to their ingenuity. So what they're doing is, typically you take the drug and you dilute it, you cut it with these other substances. And typically in the past, those substances have been inert sugars and mannitol and lactose and those kinds of things. But now they are introducing very toxic cutting agents into these industrial chemicals or medicines that are not intended for human consumption. So one case in point is levamisole, which is a veterinary dewormer, and that depletes white blood cells in humans, and they're introducing that into the drugs, into the cocaine and into the opioids as well.
Why?
It's cheap, it's plentiful.
What does it do?
It depletes white blood cells, but in terms of the drugs, you don't feel the effects at first. But as your cocaine high is wearing off, the drug converts into an amphetamine, gives you a secondary high, it gives you a secondary boost. And so it makes you feel more emboldened, more powerful. Wow, this is a great product that I had. And actually, it's a cutting agent. It causes skin necrosis as well. Phenacetin depletes red blood cells. Aminopyrine as well. Causes bladder, kidney cancer. Liver, it causes all kinds of cancers of the internal organs. In essence, what you have are very toxic substances that traffickers are saying, wow, we can drop the price points where anyone can get this drug. And the challenge that we have is access to data. On the streets of the capitals of Paraguay, Asunción, Buenos Aires, Argentina, Sao Paulo, Brazil, Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. We can't tell you how many kids use drugs, these street kids. We know that the street kids last year, though, were inhaling the glues and the paint thinners, and today they're all using this crack cocaine. They're smoking the crack cocaine. So they've gone from this to this. And they're not there. People are dying in hospitals of common infections, and we don't know. In Argentina, they're crushing again the ingenuity, right? They're crushing the fluorescent light bulbs, and they're smoking them up. And what happens is they're cutting up their lung tissue and vomiting blood, and scarring their lung tissue and making it difficult to breathe, from children to adults. And it's very scary. What's scarier is because the price point is so cheap. It's going to Asia, and it's going to Africa as well. So last year we had several multi-ton seizures of cocaine in Sri Lanka. Cocaine had never been seen in Sri Lanka before. I heard that there were cocaine seizures in Sudan. There's cocaine seizures in the South Pacific. South Pacific Islands, which are so small, they say now we have methamphetamines, we have South Pacific, and we have cocaine. You have drugs trafficking from Asia through the Pacific to South America. You have South American drugs trafficking through the Pacific to Asia. These aren't drugs for the U.S. and for Europe and for high-income countries. These are drugs for the global South. And I think that this should be a wake-up call, an alarm bell for all of our societies that we need to address this problem more holistically, more across borders, and we really need to start mobilizing the international donor community to start supporting the various components of this throughout that need to be built in the drug demand reduction architecture throughout the world. In Africa, we're very concerned about drug trafficking trends, cocaine coming into Africa, into West Africa, into Southern Africa, and opioids, heroin coming in through Eastern Africa, methamphetamine being produced in the African continent, but also the fact that we have a lot of cutting agents that are also being introduced into the drugs themselves. We've heard that in South Africa there have been pharmaceutical companies that have been raided, and there have been introduced into the drugs neurotoxins as well. 5 neurotoxins, including 2 precursors to sarin, have been introduced that cause Parkinson's-like tremors in drug users as well. These are very alarming developments. And again, price points lowering so these products can be exported to other African countries as well. This is really concerning to us, and in response we have a few different projects and programs that are aimed to help overcome this. And before we get into those, I just wanted to say, in terms of the African Union in our project with them, we have developed a system of epidemiological data collection to at least know what's happening on the African continent.
What is how do you say it?
Epidemiological.
Epidemiological.
Because
epidemiological. What does that mean?
Study
Once-
of epidemics.
Good. At a basis, let's call it to make it simple. It's data collection in terms of drug trends and flows and consumption patterns to know what actually is happening in terms of substance use across the African continent. There is no data collection system at the moment by many African countries, with the exception of 4 countries that have very good systems that have been established. We have South Africa that has a very good system, Senegal, Nigeria, and Kenya, and they each have their national systems. And so with the African Union support, we established a program where those 4 came together to sort of harmonize and develop one Pan-African system template. And then we established a program, which is now running in its 3rd year, where every year we add 5 volunteer countries that designate one focal point to take these common kind of data collection forms and push them down throughout the whole Ministry of Health system to be able to collect the data from primary care, hospital settings, and also the law enforcement system in terms of the police and collect data from there. And to then have that common data shared among the different countries that are members of this to get a better picture of what's happening in terms of drug trends and flows in the continent. We now have 15 countries that are part of this project, and we hope to bring another 5 to 8 more countries over the next year, with the goal that we'll eventually make it to the 54 countries in the continent.
And so, when you talk about harmonizing the as a Pan-African program, are you talking about harmonizing the law enforcement activities? Are you talking about harmonizing the medical response? Or are you talking about harmonizing the education goes in schools? All of the above, none of the above.
I'm just talking about data collection to know what's going on.
Right.
And then the response actually can come from this working group for drug demand reduction that brings the different governments together, where they say, here's the data, here's what's going on. To do a national drug use survey, which is like the gold standard of a household survey, you will go and you will ask people, do you use drugs? And we've even done with biological testing, hair, saliva, and urine testing. That's very expensive, that's very time consuming. And you have to miss hidden populations, so you actually have to go to other populations, street living populations, for example, that may not fit into these surveys. These are very complex and very expensive surveys, and it's not realistic to say, let's just do these all over. So the best way to do that really is from the response angle, and to see what some of the demands are in terms of services and where we can capture the data, get some indication of what the problems and the trends are. And then to see, once you see that there is a problem, how you actually can start delivering services along that continuum of prevention to treatment to recovery to be able to address that. But the response really has to be very tailored to each individual country.
It seems to me with it seems like there's a convergence right now between drugs becoming affordable for the global South and a demographic boom in Africa. So it seems like if something isn't done to get ahead of this, it could be a catastrophe.
It certainly could. Often drug use is seen as an isolated issue, but actually drug use impacts everything in our society. Drug use, of course, impacts public health, which in ways that are very clear and understandable, but also there are many forms of drug use that have many other health consequences. There's injecting drug use as well, which can lead to HIV and TB. Drug use can also exacerbate psychiatric conditions as well, or initiate them as well, so you can have all kinds of other psychiatric issues that may come up. Drug use will also fuel drug production, because as soon as people start seeing it's profitable, you will start to see more production actually occurring to start meeting demand to make the quick buck. But also drug use has a security impact as well. And so you look at public security, people that want drugs, again, that are addicted will go to no ends to get money to buy these substances. So that means more crime, more violence, more insecurity. We see also all of these other issues of transnational organized crime that deal with corruption and money laundering. All of these things are impacted and fueled by drug use as well. And then we look at security issues as well. Violent extremism, insurgencies. Many times on the African continent, we've seen them been fueled by drug use as well. Child soldiers being given methamphetamines to make them aggressive and fight, and then given downers and depressants when they're not fighting, so that it relieves hunger and so that they're not sort of aggressive. And so we could very well see this becoming a very destabilizing factor. Economic development, of course, is impacted by drug use, because you see that we have actually what we call dailies. It's the lost hours of productivity. There's an actual economic measure where you could see in terms of dollars how much money you're actually losing by having individuals with substance use disorder, and over their lifetime how much productivity the society will lose in terms of GDP. That's actually quantifiable. But when you move beyond that, you also look at societal development, family development. Parents who use drugs have children who are more likely to use drugs as well. And so children model the behavior of their parents. And what you can actually have is a cycle of addiction, which also breeds poverty and violence, and it's sort of this never-ending transgenerational cycle that is going to be very difficult to break once it becomes entrenched. And that will have a very degrading effect on the community. So when you look at where we are in terms of the policymaking world, you have all of these issues that actually will have a very detrimental impact on governance. And we all have a responsibility to address this as a core issue and elevate it. It is an SDG. It is there as one of the key issues to address, because it really is very broad-reaching in terms of how it affects and impacts all of society.
I know we're getting towards the end, but you focused a lot on the drug demand. I mean, that makes sense because that's your program. But when we talk about INL and we talk about drugs and thugs, we've talked about the drugs part. Can we talk a little bit about the thugs part? Or maybe that's outside of your area of expertise. But so someone may be listening. Let's say a head of state is listening to this program and they say, "Oh, drugs are going to become a problem in the global south. They're more affordable now. We have a demographic boom in Africa. Let's put in some extremely punitive measures to the people who are manufacturing them." Now, on a personal level, I can understand the sentiment, right? But I was wondering if you could kind of get at what's INL's approach towards the enforcement part.
We work with governments, particularly the ministries of the Interior, ministries of Justice, to help strengthen their capacity. And so a lot of what INL does is training. We have actually an international law enforcement academy in Botswana, and we invite police officers, Supreme Court officials, prison officials to come and receive training. We're very focused on capacity building, prison reform as well. In some cases, there's sort of in-kind support that we provide as well. And it's all within the realm of sort of strengthening countries where they are. I think the key, whether it's for demand reduction or any other kind of program, the key is to really meet the countries at where they are in terms of their strengths and their needs, and making sure that that there's also an interchange between those members of countries that can support each other as well. That there's an exchange of experiences and ideas. It's not to say that the U.S. has all of the answers to these problems. The U.S. has a huge addiction crisis right now. At the same time, we produce over 80% of the world's scientific literature in the field of addiction science. So we have a lot of science and technology to share. The idea is really not to export the programs, but to export the science, the concept of what works, the experiences that we've had, and to say, really, look, you know your systems best, see how best you can adopt and incorporate and assimilate these different types of interventions into the reality of your context.
So I want to end on a high note, but I'm going to ask this question. And given what you've told us about the extent that people go to inflict this poison upon the public of the world, right? Crushing light bulbs and mixing things with what was the thing?
Veterinary.
Yeah, I mean, so how can we win this? Is this to be won, or is it something to be contained? What's the bright spot here?
This is definitely to be won. It can be won, but it has to be won very importantly by cultivating and developing a workforce that is prepared to address it. And that is where INL is actually focused most of its work. My program focuses most of its work. We have worked very much to develop a training program that we make available to all countries of the world that are interested, that is free of charge, where we bring trainers and train those experts within each country, and those countries can then share that curriculum further and train their workforce. But beyond that, we have a process of examination, of credentialing, of professionalizing the workforce, and of unifying the workforce through an international society of substance use professionals. It's called ISUP, ISSUP, and I encourage all treatment workers around Africa to join this organization free of charge. And the purpose is to really start unifying the workforce, connecting across borders. People in this realm, those that provide treatment services and prevention services, feel very isolated, feel like they don't have a lot of guidance. And in fact, this is the most important universe because of individuals to get to from the government standpoint, from the donor standpoint, because they are the ones that directly will impact the lives of those that need to be prevented from using drugs or that need to be treated in using drugs. And those are the ones that will directly provide services. And unless we have cultivated that workforce, none of this will be of use. Many countries have come to me saying, we don't have enough treatment centers, we don't have enough prevention centers. No country will ever have the amount that they need, and we will never have the resources to construct and fully fund the operations of all of these treatment centers around the world. But the one thing that the field of substance use treatment prevention does have is very passionate advocates. It could be the person that came through recovery. It could be the local religious leader that is devoting, his life to this cause or her life. It could be the community worker. It could be the grandmother. It could be the school teacher. It could be the parent. It could be anybody. These are the people that we need to capture and say, we all have a civic responsibility to become a substance use prevention treatment professional. And that means that I may not be giving counseling services, but I could be giving referral. I could give you a talk. I could connect you with someone that could help you. I could give you food or shelter, or I could do something. But you can't do anything if you're not part of a system. And so what INL is focused on is building that system, which is called ISUP. Every year, ISUP has a very large conference in a different part of the world, a big workshop. We had our first in Thailand many years ago for the Asia region, and every year we have it in a different continent. So 2 years ago it was in Brazil for South America, then it was in North America and Mexico, and this year it's in Africa. It's going to take place in December in Nairobi, Kenya. We're working with the Kenyan government. We expect between 2,000 to 3,000 people. And we invite all of the continent to come. It'll be international, so there will be people there from all over the world, but we really invite the African continent to show up if you want to contribute, if you want to be part of this workforce that is going to address this issue. We will have over 20 rooms, each with different trainings in substance use treatment and prevention, from understanding the concept of the disease to building counseling skills, to doing prevention work, to recovery work in schools, work with families. We'll have a lot of tracks there, different training tracks for everyone, so that everyone can sort of take a role in this conversation and participate.
And as a father, we'll close with this. As a father, of two small children, is there an age that is too young to begin talking to them about drugs? And how do you have that conversation with a child? I think you know where I'm going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have some practical advice for people listening who aren't connected to government and that are concerned about their families are the front line, the first line of defense? What advice can you give us?
Drug prevention doesn't begin at the adolescent years. Drug prevention begins, I say, as soon as the children can start interacting. And actually the prevention science begins actually at birth with parental attachment. And when you go through some of our curriculum, you're talking about from the beginning. Obviously, when children are 5 or 6 years old, you're not talking about drugs. You don't want to inspire curiosity. You don't want to be explicit in your description of the substances. But when they are young, you want to talk to them about keeping the body safe and healthy, about making your parents proud, about being a responsible, person. And you want to continue those messages, and as developmentally appropriate, you start introducing certain concepts. When there are kids in school that start talking about, drugs as a nebulous concept, as there are bad things out there that are drugs, can be discussed. When they are in high school and there are specific drugs, if it's high school or if it's middle school and there are specific drugs out there, parents have to be really in tune. Okay, so there are these words are coming out. And I think the key thing is the communication with children has to be very open and fluid. And knowing, and this goes beyond drugs. It also deals with sex, it deals with peer pressure, it deals with bullying, it deals with so many of these factors that children are facing. You really, from a very young age, have to be very attuned to what are these different experiences that children are facing, and how best to, at the developmentally appropriate age, start introducing these. And we really emphasize that it's very important for ministries of education, for example, when we talk about drug prevention. We have curriculum that begins from first, what would you call kindergarten, from first grade, all the way through when they're 17, 18, when they're graduating from what would be the equivalent of high school. So prevention is not just a sprinkling of prevention at one moment in time. It's consistent throughout every year of education. It's just that its form takes different shapes, and it just has to be very appropriate for that age, so that it doesn't inspire curiosity or it doesn't have a negative impact. And there's a whole science to that, which is what our curriculum for treatment and for prevention, which we make available to all governments around the world, is for.
Is that publicly available?
It's publicly available, but we control its dissemination, because we also don't want people just taking it and introducing things that are not scientific and sort of making it their own. So if anybody is interested, you can go to the website of ISUP, www.issup.net, isup.net, and you can go to the curriculum, and you can actually download the first 2 courses for free and kind of see what they look like. And if you would like to receive all of them, again, we are free to share it. We share it with governments, with universities, or with civil society organizations that have a training mandate, and they then disseminate. They become education providers, and they disseminate it throughout the world. And we are happy to fund the training of these entities, these education providers, so that they can then receive the curriculum, be trained in it, and then disseminate it throughout the country.
Well, Braian, any last words? Anything that we didn't cover that you'd like the audience to know?
I would just like to thank you for this opportunity once again. And again, I'd like to encourage all of the listeners to really consider taking part in this very important cause. Everyone can contribute in some way. Really reflect on how best you can become I'll call it a substance use prevention treatment worker or professional. I think of myself as being in several of these different networks because, yes, I'm within the government, so I have a responsibility. I have the ability to be sort of a donor to support different activities that also take place, but I'm also a parent. And I have a responsibility with my children as well. And so there's volunteer work that we can all do in our communities. So let's think of how we can all impact this issue and also elevate it in the conversation when we meet others that need and have the ability to impact it.
Okay, well, Braian Morales, Division Director of Global Drug Demand Reduction Programs for the State Department's INL Bureau. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Real Talk USA.
It's my house, come on, turn it up.
The hour where the U.S. mission to the African Union comes to you through Afro FM 105.3 to highlight the United States partnership in Africa. Current issues will be discussed. Guests will engage on a variety of topics ranging from politics to jazz. Co-hosted by AUL Solomon of Afro FM and Chris Meade of USAU. The show will air every Thursday from 5 to 6 p.m. Feel free to participate by sending messages to the USAU social media sites www.usau.usmission.gov or www.facebook.com/USAU and follow USAU on twitter.com/USAU.
Just relax. Welcome to my house.
Real Talk USA.
Welcome to my house. It's my house.